Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked? Here we go. Your dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us. We broadcast 2 hours a day, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. through 11 a.m. Central Time. So if you'd like to call us, that's the best time to call because that's when we're live. The call-in number is 866-582-9933. 866-582-9933. Telephone listen line is 605-477-3249. 605-477-3249. Jason is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. Rich Sheben's with us. Welcome, Rich Sheben.
Well, thank you, Mr. Finelli. How are you this morning?
Very well. It's freezing cold. I've got a couple quick announcements. Friday class, new instructor coming on board. His name is David. He's in Illinois. He escaped being murdered by John Wayne Gacy. That's Friday, hour number 1. Seriously. Can you imagine being in the throes of a mass murderer and escaping? And we're going to hear that story. That's Friday morning, hour number 1. Hour number 2, Joel Skousen. So we know it's getting bad. I believe that the Civil War has started in the United States already. We're in the very beginning stages of the Civil War. And we're on our own. How can you make your generator quieter if you want to not be noticed? And where can we go not to be pestered by others, including those who claim that they're there to help? 2 items that we're going to talk about, 2 topics with Joel and the amazing story of David in Illinois. I'm looking forward to both of those broadcasts. So Rich Sheben's with us. Rich, where do you want to start today?
Well, first of all, I want to give credit where credit's due. I'm going to give an Economic 101 update, but I want to congratulate Sheriff Mike Lewis. If you're listening or if anybody in Maryland is listening, please congratulate him on standing up for the Constitution. I'm not going to pronounce this correctly, but Wicomico County Sheriff, and this is in Maryland, says he will not comply, if Maryland lawmakers follow through with long gun licensing and confiscation law. See, these are the heroes that we need. I've talked about William Binney. I've talked about Kevin Shipp. I've talked about quite a few people who need to be patted on the back because this is what, if I had people ask me, what do we need for prosperity? What do we need for happiness? What do we need in America right now? People hear me talking about political correctness often. And obviously political correctness is anti-truth, propaganda, professional wordsmithing, and I've gone through all that in much detail. But political correctness has to have one thing to be allowed, to be successful, and that is lack of guts, lack of courage from the people. Okay? So we need to stand for principle, and here's a sheriff who's doing it, and there's another article here about Sheriff Clark. I'm sure everybody knows who Sheriff Clark is. He's also a hero. He's a retired sheriff out of Wisconsin. He basically says, and I will quote this article, the progressive left's ideology and activist behavior bear disturbing similarities to psychology, of cults, writes retired Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark in an op-ed at Town Hall. He explains that left-wing movements require the individual to suppress reason in exchange for obedience, that's another word for submission, that's another word for lack of courage and guts, to a leader or ideology. Such controlling behavior is typically used by cults or authoritarian regimes, and like cults, the left-wing progressives target disenfranchised individuals. See, and this is why you always hear me talk about standing for principle. 3 criteria, very simple, very quick. The same rules, laws, and accountability for everybody. The second is truth. And the third is, if someone has less consequences for their behavior because of what group they come from, then you do it too. And when I talk about group, it's not just skin pigmentation or gender or sexual orientation or religion. It's also aristocracy over the serfs. It's also the Democrats, how they get a pass on everything that's pretty much illegal over the Republicans. So this is why we need, in fact, those 3 criteria for standing for principle then should be a law. So, Vince, I have a lot of material here. Would you like me to go through the Economic 101 update and get that over with?
Yeah, please do. Take your time, go through it, and I'm going to sit back and listen intently.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you again for allowing me to exercise my First Amendment rights. And what I try and do, folks, is I read a lot of stuff. I try to put it in bullet points so the context of the message is there, and I get through this as quickly as possible. But it also gives you an opportunity to check the objective facts that I have read so everybody can understand it, and I'm not being condescending. But I noticed something last week about how the long end of the yield curves has gone up. So I just want to mention some facts and put this in perspective. And if you had to title it, I guess it would be putting corporate debt into perspective. I know I've talked about all this before, but something happened last week that really got my attention. Now, first of all, I want to mention some of the things that I've mentioned before. Remember, I've mentioned a few weeks ago about how we can't even stand 3% interest rates because everything was crashing. We all remember the December stock market. Now, from December 26th to February 15th has been the largest injection of liquidity in the markets in the last 2 years. And that should be very, very scary to people because when I talk about Keynesian economics and global money supply now being at record levels, that's basically what one of the definitions of Keynesian economics is when the powers that be believe they can create a certain economy by changing the money supply. And that is absolutely incorrect. You know, in most cases, Keynesian economics is inflationary. It's elite interventionism. It's print, inflate, buy now, pay later. And, of course, that's not equivalent to happiness because all the units of measure that I've gone over the years many times in detail, like GDP, CPI, and inflation, unemployment, all these numbers, all these books are cooked. So last week I've gone over many numbers to show how lousy economic data is and how basically all the too big to fails, too big to jails go to the stocks, go to the CEOs and stock buybacks, goes to quantitative easing, which all that money being printed goes directly to the super wealthy and Wall Street and the banks for liquidity. So everything that's happening is to protect the wealthy and not the little guy. So making a turn here into debt, I'm talking especially about corporate debt. It's another word for credit collapsing. And it's another word, it's also related to the yield curves, which we've talked about on this show in great detail, and how even yield curves, the numbers, the unit of measures, and the calculations have been changed. So when you look at debt/credit markets, you look at government debt, you look at consumer debt, keeping in mind that 70% of consumption is consumer debt, and I've given so many reasons why the middle class or the bottom 93% is tapped out. But corporate debt is at its largest levels. Now, when you look at debt back in 2008 when they allowed the crash to happen, what did they blame it on? Now, there's a lot of things to be blamed on, but there's a certain heading that they pointed the finger at, and that was blamed on the subprime mortgage market, which we're in again. Same with auto, same with credit cards, same with school loans. Basically, the lenders are running out of suckers to lend to. So corporate debt right now is almost $10 trillion on the books. So almost $10 trillion. This is on the books. Can you imagine what's off the books? Because every book is cooked. Every number has been changed because they have a certain narrative of a certain healthy economy that they have to pass on. And I've mentioned this many times how Trump inherited a disaster. He inherited sabotage. Now, he's doing everything in his power to bring back manufacturing, but even though they're going to pencil over this possible recession that's already here, they're doing everything to cook the books to make sure it's not going to be allocated as a recession. So that being said, we have twice the amount of debt, especially corporate debt, from 2007 to 2008, twice the amount. Now, we also have to remember that bond rating companies are also fixed and rigged. But at the same time, bond ratings one notch above junk. So imagine if they weren't rigged, what these zombie companies would be rated at. So who buys the debts/bonds? Basically yield desperate pension funds. So, warning Will Robinson, 1/3 of his debt is due in approximately 3 to 4 years. So the last couple of weeks, remember when I mentioned that banks don't want to lend, and I gave a bunch of reasons for it? Well, now that I noticed a big increase in the long end of the Treasury bonds, 10s and 30s. Banks are tightening. That's what that means. So they're raising rates on the long end, which eliminates credit. So you're saying, so big deal. So, well, credit and debt and credit markets and bonds and yield curves, they're all connected at the hip. So if banks are tightening, in other words, raising rates, they're eliminating credit. So when the banks go in to refinance, which they have been able to do for year over year after year, and rates are tightening and increasing, how are they going to be able to do that? And I'll talk more about that after the break, Vince.
Yeah, first break. Rich Evans with us, offgridmontana.com. Economic update. USA prepares. Rich Evans with us. Rich, please continue.
Well, thank you, Vince. And before I continue with my Economic 101 update, I just want to throw a little something out there for the people who know who Tommy Robinson is. He's a hero out in the UK. And he basically sticks up for not just truth, but he sticks up for the kids. He's against the pedophile rings and things like that. And he basically did a sting operation called Panodrama. It's an hour documentary, and he basically exposed the fake news of the BBC. It really is real journalism, what he did. It shows how the mainstream media does everything in their power. They even tried to get people to say sexual things about him so they could file charges, and they did all this stuff with group identity politics, and you just have to see it. It's called Panodrama, and it's on newswars.com, and you can probably they're eliminating it from YouTube and all over. You're going to have to go to a site and probably get it off of somebody's hard drive. But Panodrama, Panodrama, with Tommy Robinson, it's very worthwhile to see, and shows how the mainstream media does everything to control the narrative, sway public opinion, and do things illegally with blackmail and blacklisting and the like. So let me go back to my Economic 101 update. And what I was just talking about, basically the results of what I just mentioned is going to be more defaults, more bankruptcies, and more zombie companies. So some people say that banks are Teflon. I think it depends. I'm going to be real quick here. Basically, banks get bailed out, and they have liens on houses, on cars, on land, which where I'm getting at, they're always the first lien holder. They get paid first. But there's a shadow banking industry that could collapse. And one great example is an outfit called Quicken Loans. I'm sure everybody's heard about this. So they're quite a bit more compromised because they don't have depositors to fall back on. They can't take advantage of fractional reserve lending, which is unethical in the first place, but they don't have certain abilities that certain banks have. So, and then we have the other problem of if we have an inverted yield curve going into the mix, that could send everything down because this is why they're trying to raise the 10s and 30s. They're trying to control everything. So if the yield curve does invert, which the 1, 3, 5, and 7 has, and the 1, 3, and 5 is inverted right now slightly, I can see that they're trying to correct this. And just a little sidebar here, when you have, if the yield curve does invert, what's going to happen is the people are going to buy short-term bonds for a higher yield, and then the money's coming in from the long-term loans from the bank customers won't pencil out. So it's going to put the banks more in the red. Now, I just want to throw another little sidebar here, a little FYI. In Denmark, I'm sure we've all read why Denmark, in a lot of surveys, is one of the happiest countries in the world. Well, their 30-year mortgage loan is 1.5%. Just FYI. So going back to the yield curve on the 10s and 30s, the treasuries, the notes, bills, bonds, if they keep going up, then the high yield this high yield corporate bonds / debt / credit markets could come down hard because they're already hanging on, by their nails because they can't afford to pay the interest on their debt, especially these zombie companies. So basically, the Fed is going to control the short term, the Fed funds rate. That's always been an admission. No one disagrees with that. But what they're trying to do, from what I'm reading, is now control the long-term market. Basically, yield curve perception. So if they're never going to allow inversions to occur, which is always a precursor to, or 99% of the time, to a recession, that means everything is going to be artificial and phony. Stocks, bonds will forever be rigged. Supply and demand and free markets, rest in peace. So if you're the little guy and you are trying to get wealthy, forget about it. It's never going to happen. And the big guy's always going to get bailed out. And I'll finish just a couple more sentences, Vince, after the break.
Okay. Rich Sheben's with us. We'll be right back. Rich Sheben's with us, off-grid Montana. Rich, please continue. Did we lose Rich?
Can you hear me now, Vince? Sorry about that.
Yeah, yes, I can hear you now. Yeah, please continue.
I was singing during the break, and I didn't want people to hear me because everybody would hang up, and so I put it on mute, so pardon me. All right. Yeah. So basically, all this information I'm giving folks is basically the insiders, the debtors, are going to become richer, wealthier, because they can afford the risk, and everybody else becomes poor because they can't afford the risk. And they don't get the information of when things are going to go up or things are going to crash, et cetera. So when the Fed buys more debt, they print more money, less consumer confidence occurs, more artificially induced inflation, more bank bailouts, more malinvestment, which leads to zombie companies. The bottom 93%, the little guy, this is why I talk about QE for the people. We should be allowed to reap the benefits of low interest rates and cash back at the end of the fiscal year if we go to negative rates. Because we've given, there's all this talk about universal basic income. We've given universal basic luxury to the super wealthy on the backs of the middle class. So every policy over the past 40 years has been anti-middle class by design. So debt's growing much faster than growth, savings, and debt-free economies is what grows the country, not debt. So You got to look at all these things on top of it that's happening. I've given so much information, but I'm going to give it a little more. Farm loan delinquencies hit the highest level in 9 years. U.S. export declined by $4 billion during the month of December. J.C. Penney announced dozens of stores closing. Victoria's Secret has announced close to 60 stores closing. Gap announced it's closing hundreds of stores over the next 2 years. Payless Shoe Store has declared bankruptcy in over 2,000 stores. Tesla is closing all their physical sales locations and going to sell vehicles online only. Pepsi has started laying off workers and committed to millions of dollars of severance pay. The Baltic Dry Index has dropped to the lowest level in more than 2 years. Factory orders were slumped in 3 years. Largest decline, the Philly Fed Business Index. Home sales are dropping like a rock. Housing starts. I could probably do a whole show on the negative statistics. But the reason why I shared this with you earlier about debt, about credit markets, and about the yield curve and corporate debt is because in 2008, when they blamed the crash on the subprime mortgage market, we are double that in corporate debt in the trillions that's on the books, and twice the amount from 2007 to 2008, and these bonds are rated as junk. So what I'm saying is to be prepared, because now the powers that be are cooking all the books. Everything is now going to be artificial and phony. Everything is going to be rigged. The demand is gone. So people need to be aware of this. People need to be prepared. I know they're doing everything in their power to comb over a possible recession, but now nothing matters. Numbers are irrelevant. So, Vince, if you have any questions before we go on to whatever you want to do next, I'd be more than happy to discuss it.
I've got a couple comments. You mentioned that lenders are running out of suckers to lend to. I absolutely agree. Here's some real numbers. In 2008, we had what was called a recession. It was really a financial panic. But during that year, new car sales were down 11%. In 2018, 10 years later, it's just last year, a few months ago, new car sales are down 6.8%. So new car sales are way down. Ralph Nader once said, and this is a quote, GM's motto seems to be going backwards into the future. I absolutely agree with him. General Motors has taken quality out of a number of their vehicles. They used to have some pretty darn good vehicles, but they're getting more unreliable every year. In 2018, the average cost of a new car, the average, was $35,000. I'm rounding these numbers to make it easy for our class to visualize. The average cost of a new car was $35,000. The average car insurance in America is $900 a year. I'm just throwing these numbers out to you for you to think about. The average salary for a 20 to 24-year-old is $27,000. The average salary for a 25 to 34-year-old was $39,000. And the average salary for a 35 to 44-year-old is $49,000. The average price of a home in the United States is $302,000. So here's the question. So why is it that someone who earns $49,000 a year can't seem to afford a home that is 6 times the annual salary? You would think that if you earn $49,000 a year, you'd be able to afford that $302,000 average home, because it's only 6 times the annual salary. Seems like a no-brainer, right? So why is it that we can't afford our homes? Well, the reason is because of taxes and inflation. If you earn $49,000 a year, you're not going to get $49,000 a year. You're going to get maybe, by the time the government corporations are done with you, the sum of the government corporations, you might have a third of that left. That's why you can't afford a new home, or a home, or anything else for that matter. Now think about this. A brand new Ford Falcon in 1964 was $1,495. Car insurance today is averaging $900. That's just for insurance. Used to be able to buy a car for a little bit more than that, just the insurance. To me, that's why one of the reasons why we're in so much trouble. And people are depressed. And you add insult to injury, which would be the electromagnetic frequencies, the toxic foods, the air pollution, the water pollution, the stress of the boss, more, faster. You know, oh, by the way, and if you don't get it done, we're going to fire you on Friday. You know, that kind of thing. Life's miserable. Absolutely miserable for so many people. And it does not have to be. Because if you look at compensation, why is it that so many CEOs of corporations are making so much more than the median employee makes? There's a company called FleetCor, Fleetcor. The CEO's name is Ronald Clark. Ronald Clark he is the most overpaid CEO in America. He makes $52 million a year. The median employee of that company makes $35,000 roughly. He makes 1,517 times more than the middle paid employee makes. 1,500 times more. How about the CEO of Oracle? Makes 907 times more. Broadcom, well, I can't tell you, he makes $103 million a year. But how about the Wynn Resorts Limited Corporation? Stephen Wynn makes 777 times more than the median employee makes. And the median employee makes $44,000. How about Disney? Robert Iger, Iger, makes $36 million. 787 times more than the median employee makes. The list goes on and on. If you go down to the top 25 overpaid executives, what you'll find is that AT&T is at the bottom. The CEO of AT&T makes $29 million. The average AT&T employee makes a fortune, $78,000 a year, right? I'm sorry, the median employee. That's a lot, $78,000. And he's the lowest paid of the top 25 overpaid CEOs in America. That's a problem. I'm surprised we haven't had a fighting civil war yet. I'm surprised. I believe that we are in a civil war right now, the beginnings of it. And these are the kinds of things that are causing it. CEOs making so many more times what the median employee makes. Do they put their pants on a different way? Are they really that smart? Do they really deserve to make, like the Expedia Group? Okay, you've heard of Expedia. CEO makes $31 million. Median employee, $72 million. It looks like Mark Okerstrom of Expedia makes over 400 times more. Think about that, class. CSX. The CEO of CSX makes 151 million. 15 to 100 times more. Is this reasonable? Or is this just class envy? Or is something really wrong with the system? And I think the answer is, there's something wrong. And who do you blame? The board of directors. I want to thank Grace Thorne. I'm looking at some photographs that she sent me. Grace Thorne is a USA Preparedness instructor. She taught the 6th grade at an elementary school in Ryan, Oklahoma. And in this picture, we were laughing to beat the band. There's Ed from Florida, there's Aaron Dakins, Mrs. Finelli, John Statmiller, Grace Thorne, Matt Stein, Ricky Rocket, and Rich Scheben, and we're all laughing and scratching and having a great time. Can you imagine having a great time today? It's pretty tough, isn't it, Rich? I mean, with all this news that's happening and this civil war upon us, gosh.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, Vince, it's pretty obvious, and I've mentioned this before, that most of the effort, especially regarding legislation, policies, fake news, is to maintain the status quo, which includes trust fund babies, nepotism, multi-million-dollar inheritances, maintaining the caste system for us and fleecing the little guy against, which is us, for the addiction to power, money, and control in a police state and a fascist system which Trump inherited, and a special tiered system of rules, laws, and accountability for victim group status. So it's almost impossible for one to control their own destiny when math doesn't matter, and that's one of the reasons I mentioned all these professors from around the country, including the University of Illinois, which they're saying now, even math instructors saying that math is now racist. It's white supremacist. And we should use subjective emotional opinion in lieu of objective facts. And I'm not lying. I might be paraphrasing a little bit, but I have the article here somewhere. And so let's think about, as you know, Vince, we try hard to talk about ideas and solutions for the little guy, which doesn't have any representation, any rights, or any restitution under the law. So I mentioned this movie in the book, and I mentioned it on the air a few times. I haven't done it in a couple of years, I think. But there's a movie with Sidney Poitier. It's an older movie. I don't know. I'm guessing 20 years old. It's called The Simple Life of Noah Dearborn. And even the greedy lawyer in the book basically made life changes, and he quit his high-paying job of screwing people to make wine. So we have to stop allowing the powers that be making us adopt being oppressed. We have to adapt to Plan B. And what this movie, The Simple Life of Noah Dearborn, is about with Sidney Poitier is a man who lives, he's an old man, he doesn't look old, and I don't think Sidney Poitier ever does look old, but he lives off-grid, and he has cows, and he has goats, and he has a little stream, and he has a little bridge that he was fixing in the movie, and he's kind of a carpenter. He's like an expert carpenter. And he doesn't even care about working for money. People almost have to throw checks at him. And he just loves his life. His house is paid for. Now, he did get it inherited from his uncle. But his house, and I think he's living on like 30 acres, is bought and paid for. And he just has a great life. It's a simple life. And he spends it helping the little guy, helping the little person, and even fixing like screen doors and things for women who have a bunch of kids and don't have a father in the home. He doesn't have the skill sets, and just helps people. And he doesn't need much, and he spends all his time doing his carpentry chores and working on his hobby farm on his 30 acres and living off-grid and having fun. And I don't want to give too much away in the movie, but it was some real estate company who is trying to swindle him out of his land and kick him off so they can build a mall. But I'm not going to tell any more information. But it's a great story, and everything that I say that and suggest, especially ideas and solutions, I either have done it myself or I'm doing it myself. So I think living off-grid is an excellent way to go. I think growing your own food, raising animals, hunting and fishing, living below your means, knowing the fine lines between needs and wants, living frugal, making your own energy and electricity. I think it's heating with wood. I think it's all a very doable lifestyle in an era where despair is running amok and people can't control their own destiny. Vince?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When we come back, I'm going to tell you about a beef recall that you need to know about. There's 30,000 pounds of ground beef that are suspect. We'll tell you exactly where it is when we come back. Everyone all set, cocked, locked? Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. Rich Sheben's with us. Class, if you have a concern about your drain pipes freezing or your toilet freezing, let's say you decide to close off part of your house because it just is so hard to heat. It's so expensive to heat houses with the energy costs and the rising electric costs. Here's what you can do. Now, this is just for the drain pipe. So I'm talking about the drain under your sink and your toilet. You can mix some salt. I'm talking about just common table salt. I wouldn't use the pink stuff. I wouldn't use the good stuff. I would just use the plain old white stuff. And let's say take a tablespoon of salt, mix it with a small amount of water, and then pour it down the drain. Now, it's corrosive. So if you have brass plumbing, brass drain plumbing, old drain plumbing, it could corrode it and make a hole in it. But if you have plastic plumbing, there's nothing to worry about. Okay? So that's something that you can do for plastic plumbing. If you have a swimming pool and you lower the water level below the skimmer because you don't want the skimmer to freeze, here's what I did when we had a swimming pool. We had an in-ground swimming pool. I would take half-inch pipe insulation, the kind that's kind of a cell foam. Usually it's brown or black, and you can get it at the big box home improvement stores, about 4 feet long. What I would do is I'd take the half-inch size, and I would shove it down the skimmer plumbing. And I'd leave enough of it sticking up, and I'd bend it over so that it wouldn't slip down into the plumbing. And I'd make sure that I didn't turn the pump on and suck that pipe insulation down through the return plumbing. You can do that. And if you have 4 feet of it, you can leave about a foot of it sticking out. You have 3 feet going down into the ground, and that will protect the pipes from freezing because the water in there will try to compress that foam, and it can. So you won't be likely to break your plumbing in your pool. So those are just 2 tips that I have. They're in the book that I'm writing. So it's simple things about the way I do things. Rich Scheben, we talked about stores closing. Well, here's some numbers. These are the numbers from Business Insider. Here are the retail stores closing in 2019. Here we go. Payless Shoes, 2,500 stores. Gymboree, 805. Shopco, 251. Performance Bicycle, 102. Charlotte Russe, 94. Sears, 70. Destination Maternity, 67. Kmart, 50. Christopher and Banks, 40. Beauty Brands, 25. Henry Bendel, 23. Lowe's, let me say it a different way, Lowe's. Who would ever think that a home improvement store would be closing stores? And when Lowe's closes one, it's a big one. 20. Macy's, 9. J. Crew, 7. Kohl's, 4. Nordstrom, 3. J.C. Penney, also known as J.C. Penney, 2. Lord & Taylor. Now, this one breaks my heart, Lord & Taylor, 2. Because when I was growing up, there was a gal by the name of Mrs. Meeks. And Mrs. Meeks worked at Lord & Taylor. And when I was 2, 3, 4 years old, 5 years old, she remembered me. And she took care of me all the way through, through grammar school, probably through much of high school, because then he was skinny and he was hard to fit. And those were the days when a person was a career salesperson. Sears had career salespeople. So if you went to the paint department at Sears, you'd see the same guy over and over and over for years. I'm not talking about months. I'm talking years, actually decades. Same thing with Lord & Taylor. Had people who knew their business, who knew the products, who could take care of their customers and provide advice and counsel. Not anymore. Not anymore. You go to Home Depot or you go to Lowe's and you ask them a question, you'll probably end up educating them because they know less than you do. They don't even know where it is, let alone what it is. Do you have one of these? I don't know. What is it? That's what you're going to get if you go to one of those big box stores like Lowe's or Home Depot. At least I do. Maybe I'm the only one that happens to. Just ask them if they know where their anode rods are for their water heaters. And you probably get, what's an anode rod? Scheben?
Well, yeah, we have definitely entered a plutocracy where the super wealthy class is controlling everything, or trying to. Governments, corporations, information, who wins, who loses, everything. But there is an article here that the U.S. Army takes 50 tons of gold from Syria in an alleged deal with ISIS. So why can't we use that to build our wall? See, the problem is there's so many things that, suggestions and ideas and solutions that we come up with just on this show that doesn't get discussed and doesn't get to Trump because he's so guarded in the White House. You know, all we have to do, just regarding the wall, where the little guy has no protections or rights or restitution on the law, Trump wants a wall, as the majority of Americans do, because the wall offers the little guy some protection. But all we need to do is to create two laws. One, lawyers and judges who lobbied or voted for no vetting of illegals get stripped of all wealth and assets and gives it to the families who have lost loved ones to murder, rape, and have been hooked on drugs, since 90% of most of those drugs come through the southern border. And two, 15 years in USA paying taxes before you get on food stamps and welfare. You have to put into the kitty to get into it. If you put that in the law, okay, the 63% that goes into food stamps and welfare would not have that option. So it's just, we need to change our way of thinking on how we live. We need to not be the silent majority anymore. We need to speak up. We need all the lambs to become lions. And we need to read up, research up, and speak up in that order, or else we're going to lose our country. So, Vince, I do want to mention one other thing. For you listeners who are Candace Owen fans and Dinesh D'Souza fans, they did such a great job at Blexit. It's actually on YouTube before it gets taken down. I'm sure it will. Blexit, Blexit. That's where Candace Owens are getting black and Hispanics to leave the Democrat plantation. And Dinesh D'Souza explains things so well, as does Carol Swain from Prager University, on the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. He explains how the KKK was the Democrats. He explains how all the slave owners, all were Democrats and not Republicans. And he has a lot of great objective facts, which really puts things in perspective because of the propaganda, lies, and false flags that we're getting from the mainstream media. I know I went off through a few tangents there, Vince, but I just wanted to mention those things. Vince?
Okay. There's over 30,000 pounds of ground beef that are recalled over hard plastic and metal contamination. Customer complained, Washington beef, that's Washington, like George Washington beef, LLC is recalling ground beef chubs produced on December 27th, 2018. And this ground beef has a use or freeze by date of January 20th, 2019. That's 24 days after the beef was produced. So it's produced in December 27th, and on January 20th, it has a use or freeze by date. That's a long time. It's 24 days. Well, 60 days, actually over 60 days from the date of the production of this beef, an article comes out saying that there is fears of plastic, hard plastic, and metal contamination in the beef. And one more time, the company is Washington Beef LLC. And the date that you have to be concerned about is the use or freeze by date of January 20th, 2019. So if you have that, what do? I would certainly bring it back. But what's the likelihood that you're going to have it? That'd be pretty low, because most people will have eaten it already. So the recall is after it's consumed. Now think about that. What we try to do here at the farm, if we buy beef, we freeze it, and we keep the label. So we keep it for a while so that we hear about things like this. Now, what is it that could cause plastic, hard plastic, or metal being in the beef? Well, it's pretty easy. The machinery that's used to grind the beef, that could have come apart. Destroyed itself. I'm talking about the machinery in the grinding process, and it's in the beef. Now, how is it possible that it wasn't seen? Did the guy who is in charge of loading the beef into the grinding machine, not notice when they cleaned it at the end of the day? Wait a minute. Half of this auger is missing. I wonder where. Joe, did you see the other half of this auger? It looks like it's missing. Where is it? How is it possible that people who are in the production of these products don't see this? Or did they see it and go to their supervisor and say, hey, boss, I don't know where the other half of this auger is, but it's not here anymore. Do you think it might be in with the beef? Do you think it might have ground itself up? Think it's in this plastic? There used to be a plastic tub. Do you think that got ground up too? Do you think that went in with the beef? And then did the boss sit on it? Or did the boss go to his boss and say, Mr. President of the beef company, we seem to have lost a tub that we put beef in, and it looks like the auger's half gone. What should we do? Well, don't do anything, because otherwise we'll have a recall. I mean, is that what happened? I don't know. But those answers seem likely to me. A couple of days ago, we had a massive tornado in Alabama. At least 23 were killed. There's a certainty that the death toll will rise. I looked at the images on the internet of this tornado. I was at the Joplin tornado years ago, the day after it happened. I got a chance to see what it was really like. It was devastating. It looked like buildings were just swept away. I was standing on this concrete pad. It was like 24 feet by 24 feet. And it looked like somebody just poured that. It was washed clean. It looked like that would be the place where they were going to put a basketball goal and shoot some hoops. And I talked to the owner of the property. He said, yeah, that's where his garage was. That's what I saw on these images of the tornado of just a couple days ago that ripped through Alabama. Here's the point. These storms are so strong, they can take a building away. Mobile homes were destroyed, absolutely blown apart. Houses, roofs were ripped off them. The official report so far says that the path of destruction was 24 miles long and about a mile wide. on Alabama Highway 51. It was the deadliest tornado since the F5 ripped through Moore, Oklahoma, and killed 24 people in 2013. It's extremely serious. So, class, here's the point. This is a broadcast about preparedness. If you think there's a possibility that a tornado can come your way, how about considering a house with a basement? How about that? That's probably one of the single best things you can do. There are images of cars being picked up. There are images of billboards being blown miles. There are images of debris. It looks like houses went through a lawnmower and coming out the discharge chute of a lawnmower. That's what houses look like. They were shredded as if they were put through a lawnmower and scattered all around. If you're in a mobile home and you're taking shelter and that mobile home gets thrown or shredded, how can you survive that? Where are you going to go? You need to have some kind of a shelter. Now, some people would, buy one of these storm shelters and have an excavator come and dig a hole in the ground and bury most of it. If you're going to buy a home, I suggest you consider one with a basement. And if it has a basement, make sure it's not at the bottom of the hill where the basement's going to flood, if there's a flood. Look around before you buy a house. Look at what are the threats? Are there electromagnetic towers? Are there power lines? Are there transformers? Is there a nuclear reactor? Is there a chemical company? Is there a dam uphill? Are you in Tornado Alley? We're in Tornado Alley here at our farm. So what do? We built a stone farmhouse. That'll help. A basement will help. You might want to consider that. And figure out if you have a way out of the basement should the house collapse on you. Do you have the tools, the crowbars, the levers, the hydraulic jacks, the things that you might need to get yourself out? And you might plan on the cell phones not working or the electricity not working, because right now there are about 40,000 people in this area of destruction in Alabama who don't have electricity. 170-mile-an-hour winds. Pretty terrifying. I lived through an earthquake. It was pretty scary. Where do you go? When the ground is shaking, where do you go? Do you move to the left, to right, forward, backward? Do you go in the house? Do you go out of the house? Where do you go? That's even worse in a tornado. Rich Shealy and I'll be right back after these bottom-of-the-hour commercial announcements. And I'm looking forward to hearing what Rich Shealy has to say. OffGridMontana.com. Rich Shealy talked about Tommy Robinson and Panodrama, the documentary. So link, if you'd like to watch it, at usaprepares.com, usaprepares.com, page number 1. I posted it during the break. Rich Shealy?
Yeah, well, thanks, Vince. I just want to make a couple comments on what you said about meat and tornadoes. First of all, what I've read a lot of people are doing who might not be able to afford a basement or they have a water table issue is burying septic tanks, which comes in all sizes. Now, obviously, you want to use one that hasn't been, you want to use a new one and one that hasn't been used in the past for waste. But it can actually add value, especially if you're living in a trailer park and you have a very little yard. And I know this because I've lived in a trailer park for years when I first started building my equity in New York State. And obviously we don't have tornado issues there, but there was plenty of room to bury a septic tank. And that's just one way to go, especially if you have a little extra land that you own and you don't rent. And regarding the meat situation, there's so many other things besides what you mentioned about this recall for meat. There's also red dye Now the FDA is improving non-meat grown in lab, which is sold in restaurants, which looks like meat and tastes like meat. There's also steroids, hormones, antibiotics, GMO foods, pesticide-fed cattle, cloning livestock, modified proteins, enzymes in so many foods. And now a really big thing is nanotechnology. And I will just read one paragraph from an article I have here. We all have enough experience with today's biopirates who are openly colluding with the USDA, FDA, and anyone else in government like Dirty Harry, in quotes, Reed from Nevada, Democrat, who single-handedly and unanimously cast the one vote needed to pass the fake food safety bill to know that food safety and longer shelf life is most likely not what this technology, is actually intended to do. As it is, most products on the shelves of stores now are so chemically laden and contain so much GMO that I doubt spoilage is an option. After all, can chemicals, pesticides, and herbicides actually rot? And that's there's a whole article here, but now technology is getting to be a big issue where they can actually feed you sawdust bread and it can fool your taste buds. You actually think you're eating something totally different. So, and this is one of the reasons why I mentioned that movie with Sidney Poitier and The Simple Life of Noah Dearborn. I recommend everybody. It's very relaxing. It's a great movie. It's a movie about sharing skill sets, helping others, living off grid, and living simple, just like the title says. But if we could all buy ourselves a little piece of land instead of going into debt for a cookie cutter subdivision follower house in a metropolitan area where you have so many covenants and laws that you don't even have freedoms and liberties. Now look about going into the country and buying a little piece of land and actually becoming more self-sufficient. I guarantee you one thing, your happiness will increase dramatically. So think about doing that, folks. Think about what it takes. Think about going in with neighbors and friends and family and maybe buying a bigger piece of land and all sharing it and basically sharing skill sets and cross-training and basically pioneering and homesteading a piece of land. That was one of the most exciting adventures that I've had here in Montana, was pioneering and homesteading land. And I think everybody should experience that at least once in their life. It was just so much fun. And I put my log cabin where I want, my barn where I want, my garden where I want, my fences where I want. I cut down trees that I need for heat. Living off grid and making electricity. I've only had to run my generator one time since the third week of January this year because we've had so much sun this year. And I might not have even had to do it that day because it was a real sunny day. So it's just fun living off grid. It's fun homesteading. We need to get our adventure shtick back, if you will, because now in America, 90% of Americans don't move outside of 150 miles of where they grew up. You know, the go west young man metaphor, the adventures that our pioneers and homesteaders had, is being lost. And we need to get that back. We need to take risks. We need to have fun in nature and create a balance between nature and technology. We are really losing that, especially with our youth. The technology imbalance that they have has gone way past the law of diminishing returns. And we have to relearn those lost 19th century skills. Not forgetting 21st century technology, but we have to go back in time a little bit because the units of measure of despair and skill sets are leaving the American people in droves. Vince?
You know, as you're saying this, I'm looking out the window of the studio. I'm looking at the farm, and right outside the studio window is a herd of cows. And they are eating some hay that Mrs. Finelli and our son unrolled for them this morning. The hay is unrolled in 5-foot wide strips, and the herd of cows just gently eating, and it's just a wonderful thing to see.
Mm-hmm.
As far as I can see, out the studio windows, nothing but trees, fields, cows. It's an experience that I don't think most people can imagine. There's no horns, no sirens, no helicopters. Every once in a while we have that. Every once in a while we'll have an airplane fly over. But there's no roaring engines. It's really a peaceful lifestyle. But I've got to tell you, when you were talking about, doing what you have done, the term that I've been using came to my mind, and that is make your own mistakes. And I've been advising people for, actually over the 8 years that we've been broadcasting, but I've been saying, why don't you consider making your own mistakes? Rich Scheben, you've made your own mistakes, and we've made our own mistakes. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that in a positive way. And here's what I'm saying. Rich, you designed your cabin. You wanted it the way you wanted it to be for your lifestyle. You didn't buy someone else's mistakes. You decided you were going to do it the way you wanted it. And we did the same thing here in our farm in Missouri. We built our house the way we wanted. We put the kitchen cabinets the way we wanted. We picked where the refrigerator would go, where the island would go, where the appliances would go. We picked the layout of the farm. We picked the style of the exterior. We picked the beams. We picked the type of insulation. We picked the wiring. We built this house. We made our own mistakes, and there are darn few of them. Because we looked at all the other buildings, all the other houses we've been in. And I've got to tell you, that even the ones we've owned, not one of them was right. Not one. They all suffered from major mistakes. Like, for example, a guy, we bought a house in Virginia. It's a really nice house. The guy used masonite siding, and it started falling apart from moisture. He was a builder. He was the premier builder in the area, and this was his house. He used masonite siding. I remember calling the CEO of Masonite. It was good-looking siding, no question about it. It was beaded lap siding. It looked extraordinary. And I remember calling the CEO and saying, I just put my finger through the side of my house. How long is this stuff supposed to last? And he said, no, 25 years. And I said, okay, so you sell this as temporary siding? 25 years for siding is ridiculous. Who would build a house thinking that their siding would only last 25 years? That's what's happening. So why would you buy? I made that mistake. I didn't realize that masonite siding lasted 25 years. We had to reside the house. He put a roof on it with 215-pound shingles. The shingles didn't last very long. Why would you put a roof on that? It's so expensive in labor, and not use the best shingles you could get? Why not do that? It might cost 20% more. Why not do that? So I suggest, class, that you take into consideration all the things you've learned, and then learn more, and then build your own. Make your own mistakes. And you'll probably be a lot happier with very, very few mistakes. But if you're going to build a house, I suggest you take time off from work and stay on site during the entire duration that the workmen are there. Because you might see things like cut off pieces of wood being used as backfill against your basement. What are we going to do with all these cut off little pieces of wood? Too hard to burn them, right? Can't use them, right? Can't save them, right? Can't put them in a fireplace, right? Can't put them in a wood stove, right? So let's just, what we'll do? We'll put them in the backfill around the basement, around those concrete block walls or poured concrete walls. You know what happens next? Termites. Termites find the wood and they go, this is great. This is great. And then they start climbing up the basement walls, and then they invade your house. Why? because the workmen and the contractors were too lazy to dispose of the wood better. Like maybe put it in a pile and have somebody who has a fireplace burn it in the fireplace, or you use it in your fireplace since you paid for all that wood anyway, or your wood stove. Make your own mistakes, class. But I got to tell you, no one whom I've talked to, no one whom I've counseled, no one whom I've driven around and shown has done it. No one. No one has made his own mistakes or her own mistakes. What they do is they buy other people's mistakes. And they think it's easier. It's too hard to make your own mistakes, too hard to build your own house, too hard to be your own contractor, too hard to hire a contractor, too hard to pick plans out. So they buy other people's mistakes. Class, I always get a smile when I think of this gentleman. He's a USA Preparedness instructor, George in New Hampshire. Welcome.
Hi, Vincent. Hi, Rich. I just
Hey,
wanted
George.
to weigh in. Hi, Rich. I just wanted to weigh in on, you were mentioning about that siding that deteriorated rapidly, and it was supposed to last 25 years. There's one thing that keeps coming up, and I always forget when I'm talking to you, is that price versus cost. And I'll give you an analogy. Most everybody listening has a vehicle of some sort. Now, the paper air filters that are replaced every 12, 15,000, maybe a little more miles, say they cost $15 a piece. There's a K&N, K is in Karen, plus sign, and N is in Nancy, air filters. And they're guaranteed for 1 million miles. They might go for $50 on average. Now, you can buy a paper filter that's going to get thrown into a landfill, maybe within 15,000 miles or less. Or you could get this air filter that's made out of a heavy cotton duck material that breathes better, makes the engine run smoother, and will last the life of the car, and you can take it out and put it in another similar car, and I've seen people sell them. And you're going to get better gas mileage, too, even if it's an extra mile or so more or two from just being able to get the engine more air more efficiently in, it's going to run better, and you're not going to be leaning on the gas pedal. And like I say, cost versus price. You can go the cheap way early out. You don't have to go the real Cadillac version, but in other words, for a little, like you said, a little research, a little taking the time, you can invest your money where it's going to get a lot more mileage, literally and figuratively, than you could. And you'll say, well, what does that have to do with what you and Rich were talking about? What I'm just saying is that something like that, if you're going to hold on to the car for 6 more months, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you're going to hold on to the car for a few years, I'm just saying the same thing with the house if you put decent siding on it. That's all I wanted to say.
George, it's in the book.
Oh, it is? Okay. I didn't know.
I haven't published the book yet, but yes, that's in there. And you can get a K&N brand. We have a 1994 Chevy Turbo Diesel Blazer. It's got one in it. Got a 1994 Suburban Diesel. It's got one in it. The Jeep, it's got one in it. My old Mercedes 1996 has one in it. My Chevy pickup truck has one in it. Dodge Cummins Turbo Diesel has one in it. All of our vehicles have K&N air filters or their equivalent. Every one. And yeah, they're about $50. And our Dodge has almost 400,000 miles on it. How many air filters would we have purchased for 400,000 miles compared to $50 for that K&N air filter? Yep.
You would have been in 150,000 miles. You would have bought 10, and it probably would have cost you like a couple of $100 right there, right?
Right.
No, I'm sorry. I never heard you mention the K&N air filters, but I may not have been listening on that particular time. But
since you mentioned this, and since this is a preparedness broadcast, here's what I do. I have a parts washer, and what this thing is a 30-gallon barrel with a sink on top of it and a pump that pumps diesel fluid or diesel engine oil. And I use that as a solvent. I clean the air filters with that. I'm talking about the K&N type air filters. And then what I use to re-oil them, I don't use the K&N oil. I use bar chain oil for a chainsaw that has TAC in it, tack. So it's slightly more sticky than, let's say, a 30-weight oil.
Now you spray it on, right?
No, I drizzle it on.
Ah, okay.
Now, you can get a gallon of this bar chain oil for a chainsaw at any of the, any place that would sell a chainsaw. And it is tacky. It's kind of like honey mixed with oil, but it's not honey. It's very tacky, and it attracts the particles, the dust particles, even better than, let's say, 30 weight oil or the spray that comes with the K&N.
Last thing I'll say, you can also wash the filter in just a 5-gallon container of hot water and warm water and soap, and just let it air dry. And then before you apply, like you said, the oil.
Yeah.
I just wanted to weigh in on that, but I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your program, and you too, Rich.
Thank you, George.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, George, we've got to come on and talk about guns. Yeah. Let's have George come back on and talk about guns. Kurt Scheben, thank you so much for being with us and dispensing your wealth of knowledge. 2 hours goes by very, very quickly. Class, above
thank
all,
you for having me, Vince. Always a pleasure.
Oh, you bet. Above all, honesty and integrity. What happens next is up to you.